My brother, Mark, asked me to be the legal guardian of his 6-month-old son, Leo. His wife, Sarah, was battling stage 2 liver cancer, and his job was relocating him. It seemed straightforward, but a dark cloud of rumors about Sarah's past, specifically a paternity fraud scandal involving her best friend and a cousin at a hospital, made me insist on a paternity test before I signed anything. What followed was a devastating unraveling of secrets, lies, and betrayals that shattered our family. This isn't just a story about a paternity test. It's a deep dive into the heart-wrenching reality of narcissistic manipulation, the insidious nature of gaslighting, and the painful journey of untangling a trauma bond built on years of deceit. Witness my brother's agonizing struggle as he confronts his wife's affair, her involvement in a previous paternity scam, and the shocking truth about their son. From hushed small-town gossip in quiet Marietta, Georgia, to explosive confrontations and tearful confessions, this story explores the devastating impact of one woman's selfishness on an entire family. If you've ever been manipulated, lied to, or had your trust shattered by someone you loved, this story will resonate deeply. Prepare for emotional twists, a fight for a child's future, and the agonizing question of how to find healing when the person who betrayed you is also fighting for her life. The sterile scent of antiseptic always clung to the corridors of Northside Hospital in Atlanta, a smell I'd come to associate with a gnawing anxiety. I'm Jessica, by the way. At the time this whole nightmare began, I was 28, a high school English teacher in Marietta, a suburb just OTP, outside the perimeter, as we say here in Georgia. Oh. My older brother, Mark, then 30, was a marketing manager for a beverage company. We'd been on our own since our early 20s, when we lost both our parents in a tragic car accident on I-75. We were each other's only anchor in a world that suddenly felt vast and indifferent. About 2 weeks before my world tilted on its axis, Mark sat across from me in my cozy, slightly cluttered living room, his face etched with a weariness that went bone deep. Little Leo, his 6-month-old son, gurgled happily in his carrier on the floor, oblivious to the weight of the conversation. "Jess," Mark began, his voice low, "Sarah and we need to ask you something huge." Sarah, his wife of nearly 3 years, was 29, and Sarah was sick. Last month she'd been diagnosed with stage 2 liver cancer. The news had hit us all like a freight train. She was in and out of Northside constantly for chemotherapy, her once vibrant energy slowly being leached away by the aggressive treatments. "My company," Mark continued, rubbing his temples, "they've offered me a promotion. A big one. Head of regional sales, but it means relocating to Charlotte. It pays significantly more, Jess, money we desperately need for Sarah's medical bills, for Leo's future." He sighed, the sound heavy with unshed tears. "I can't turn it down, but Sarah, her parents are wonderful, but they're getting on in years. They can manage helping with Sarah when I'm in Charlotte during the week. I'll be home every weekend, but looking after Leo full-time on top of that, it's too much for them." He looked at me then, his eyes pleading. "We want you to be Leo's legal guardian, Jess, while I'm setting up in Charlotte while Sarah's fighting this. If anything happens," his voice cracked, "you're the only person we trust, the only family we have left." My heart ached for him. For Sarah, for little Leo. Saying no felt monstrous, unthinkable. I loved my nephew with a fierceness that surprised me, but a cold knot of unease tightened in my stomach, a discomfort that had nothing to do with the responsibility of caring for a baby and everything to do with Sarah. Marietta is a relatively small town despite its proximity to Atlanta. News, or rather gossip, travels with the speed of a summer thunderstorm. And years ago, before Mark even met Sarah, I'd heard whispers, unsettling rumors connected to her. One of my coworkers at the high school, Brenda, whose cousin was apparently embroiled in a messy legal battle, had been a veritable fountain of salacious details. The story involved paternity fraud, a best friend of Sarah's, and, disturbingly, Sarah's alleged complicity in helping to cover it up. Apparently, Sarah's best friend had convinced her husband he was the father of her child, and Sarah had supposedly facilitated this by connecting her friend with a cousin who worked at a local hospital, ensuring certain discrepancies were overlooked, allegedly in exchange for periodic payments from the unsuspecting husband and the best friend. The truth only came out when the child was almost 2, after the man's suspicious mother insisted on a paternity test. The best friend faced legal repercussions. Sarah, whose name kept popping up in the gossip, seemingly walked away scot-free. I had of course warned Mark when he first told me he was dating Sarah. I recounted the rumors, my voice hushed with concern. Mark, ever the optimist, ever trusting, had dismissed it all. Jess, it's just small-town gossip. Sarah would never be involved in anything like that. She's the kindest, most honest person I know. He was so utterly convinced, so deeply in love, that he trusted her implicitly. Within a year, they were married. Within another, Leo was born. I'd kept my misgivings to myself since then, not wanting to disrupt their apparent happiness, especially once Sarah became pregnant. What good would it do to dredge up old, unproven rumors? But now, faced with the legal and emotional enormity of guardianship, those old whispers echoed with a new, chilling resonance. This wasn't just about babysitting. This was about legal responsibility, about potentially raising Leo if the unthinkable happened to both Mark and Sarah. Mark, I said carefully, choosing my words with the precision of a surgeon, I'll do it. Of course I'll do it. For you, for Leo. But, I took a deep breath, there's one condition. I need you to get a paternity test for Leo. Mark stared at me, his face darkening. A paternity test? Jess, what the hell are you talking about? Leo is my son. How can you even suggest something so insulting, especially now with everything Sarah's going through? His voice rose, laced with hurt and anger. This was the beginning of the gaslighting, albeit from Mark, who was himself a victim of Sarah's larger deception, making me feel unreasonable and cruel for a perfectly valid concern. It's not about doubting you, Mark, I tried to explain, my own voice trembling slightly. It's about due diligence. Legal guardianship is a massive responsibility. If, God forbid, something happens and there are any questions later, it could become a legal nightmare. I just need to be sure, for Leo's sake, for everyone's sake, that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. Think of it as a formality. A formality that implies my wife is a liar and a cheat. He shot back, his face flushed. After all these years, after everything we've been through, you still believe those disgusting rumors, don't you? Oh, Sal. We argued, a painful circular argument that left us both raw. He accused me of needlessly doubting Sarah, of being cold and unfeeling. I stuck to my guns, a cold dread solidifying in my heart. My insistence wasn't just about the old rumors anymore. It was a gut feeling, a primal instinct that something was fundamentally wrong. I didn't want to be caught in the middle of a storm I couldn't see coming. I also, selfishly perhaps, wanted to buy myself time to truly process the guardianship, and to ensure I wasn't unknowingly stepping into a pre-existing mess. If Leo wasn't his, the guardianship could become exponentially more complicated. Finally, exhausted and angry, Mark stormed out, but not before reluctantly agreeing. Fine, I'll get your damn test. But when it proves you wrong, Jess, you owe Sarah the biggest apology of your life. I didn't hear from him for 2 long, agonizing weeks. The silence was a heavy, suffocating blanket. I replayed our argument endlessly, wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake, if I'd irreparably damaged my relationship with my only brother over a suspicion. Then, late one Tuesday night, my phone rang. It was Mark. His voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. Jess? You don't need to sign anything. I'm not taking the job in Charlotte. I'm staying here. Confusion warred with a sudden, sickening premonition. Mark? What happened? Why the sudden change? Did something happen with Sarah's treatment? Just mind your own business, Jess, he said, his voice cracking on the last word, and then he hung up. That wasn't my brother. My brother was kind, polite, communicative. This cold, dismissive stranger, this was someone in profound pain. My heart sank. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the paternity test had revealed something devastating. I couldn't reach him. He didn't answer my calls, my texts. I didn't dare call Sarah, not knowing what fresh hell had been unleashed. I waited a day, my anxiety coiling tighter with every passing hour. Then, unable to bear the suspense any longer, I did the only thing I could think of. I called Sarah. If anyone knew what was going on, it would be her. She answered on the second ring, her voice surprisingly strong. And then, without preamble, without even a hello, she unleashed a torrent of verbal abuse. You meddling bitch, she shrieked, her voice raw with fury. You've ruined everything. I was so stunned I couldn't speak. Sarah, I don't understand. What happened? What happened? She screamed. You and your disgusting, insidious suspicions, that's what happened. You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? You had to plant that poison in Mark's head. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The paternity test. It had to be the paternity test. Sarah, I said, my voice barely a whisper, was Leo. Is Leo not Mark's son? A choked sob on the other end of the line was my answer. He made me tell him, she wailed. After he got the results, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. He just kept saying, it's not a match, it's not a match. He did it again, you know. A second test from a different lab. Still not a match, and then he confronted me, and I told him, my mind reeled. All those years Mark had been raising another man's child. The depth of the betrayal, the sheer, calculated cruelty of it was staggering. My initial insistence on the test had been partly selfish, a way to buy time and protect myself from future complications. Now, I felt a wave of guilt. Had my selfishness inadvertently blown up my brother's entire life? But beneath the guilt, a cold anger began to simmer. This wasn't my fault. This was Sarah's doing. Who, Sarah? I asked, my voice hardening. Who is Leo's father? It was Daniel, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. Daniel was an old college friend of hers, someone Mark knew, someone they'd occasionally socialized with. It only happened once, I swear. Just after we got married. Mark was out of town for that marketing conference in Chicago. Daniel and we had too much to drink, we were emotional. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake. A mistake you kept secret for years, I said, my voice flat. A mistake you allowed my brother to build his entire life around. The casual cruelty was breathtaking. This was narcissistic self-preservation at its most destructive. She prioritized her secret over her husband's emotional well-being, over the sanctity of their marriage. I was going to tell him, she insisted, her voice rising again. But then I got pregnant, and I knew Mark was the man I wanted to be with. He was stable, kind. Daniel was, well, he wasn't Mark. I loved Mark. I still love him. Her voice cracked. This was going to ruin everything. I panicked. And the rumors, Sarah? I pressed, a cold fury building. The ones about you and your best friend, and the paternity scam with her cousin at the hospital? Were those true too? A long, choked silence. Then a barely audible, yes, she admitted it all. How she'd been the architect of that first scam, putting her best friend in touch with the hospital employee cousin, taking a cut of the money her friend and the cousin extorted from the unsuspecting husband. She'd known the devastating consequences of such a lie, and yet she'd replicated it in her own marriage, with my brother. The pattern of deceit was undeniable. She hadn't just made a mistake, she had a history of calculated, manipulative fraud. So when Mark confronted you with the paternity results, I said, trying to keep my voice even despite the rage churning inside me, you finally told him everything. Yes, she sobbed. He was devastated. He just kept saying his whole marriage was a lie. He hasn't spoken to me properly since. He's filed for divorce, Jessica, and he wants full custody of Leo. She paused and added, her voice laced with a new, desperate cunning, but Leo needs his mother, especially now. And Daniel knows, I told him. He said he's willing to fight for custody too, if Mark tries to shut me out completely. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a marital implosion. It was about to become a three-ring custody circus, with a sick woman, a betrayed husband, and a newly revealed biological father all vying for a 6-month-old baby. And I, with my insistence on a simple paternity test, had unwittingly lit the fuse. I felt awful. My brother's life was in ruins. His marriage, the child he adored, his trust in the woman he loved, all shattered. And Sarah, despite her monstrous deceit, was still a cancer patient, her future uncertain. It was a tangled, tragic mess, and every single adult involved, myself included in some small way, had failed little Leo. The weight of it was crushing. My attempted boundary formation by insisting on the test had had catastrophic, unforeseen consequences, at least for the immediate emotional state of my brother. Later that day, Mark finally called me. His voice was hollow, broken. You were right, Jess, he said, no accusation in his tone, just a profound, soul-deep weariness. You were right about her all along, and I was a damn fool. He told me everything Sarah had confessed, his words punctuated by long, ragged silences. He'd loved her so much, defended her against everyone, and this was his reward. He was a man adrift, his entire world capsized. The trauma bond he'd had with Sarah, built on years of carefully constructed lies and his own desperate need to believe in her goodness, was now a source of unimaginable pain. He told me she'd become hysterical when he'd suggested the paternity test after our initial argument. She'd accused him of not trusting her, of still believing the scammers in town. Her overly emotional reaction had been the first real chink in his armor of denial. It made him wonder. So, he'd done the test secretly, hoping, praying it would prove his nagging newfound doubts wrong. It hadn't. "She didn't have a job when we got married, Jess," he said, his voice flat. "She wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. I supported that. I supported her. I thought she stayed with me because she loved me, because she chose our marriage over any past mistakes. But it wasn't that, was it? It was because I was convenient. I was stable. I would look past her history, trust her implicitly, and provide for her without question. She only cared about herself." He was right. Sarah's actions weren't those of someone who made a one-time mistake out of love and fear. They were the actions of a practiced manipulator, someone skilled in the art of deception, someone whose primary concern was always her own comfort and security, regardless of the emotional devastation she left in her wake. This was pure, unadulterated narcissism. The only silver lining, if you could even call it that, was that Leo was blissfully unaware of the emotional maelstrom swirling around him. But for how long? My heart ached for my nephew. For the difficult path that lay ahead of him, a path paved with the wreckage of adult betrayals. And I knew, with a sinking heart, that this was only the beginning. The weeks that followed were a blur of hushed, agonized phone calls with Mark, tense encounters with a rapidly deteriorating Sarah, and the ever-present gut-wrenching worry for Leo. Mark had, as Sarah tearfully confessed, filed for divorce and was seeking sole custody of Leo, the man he'd raised as his son for 6 precious months. The betrayal had cut him so deeply that his love for Sarah had curdled into a volatile mixture of rage, grief, and a chilling, resolute anger. He was a man hollowed out, going through the motions of life, his eyes haunted. The news about Daniel, Leo's biological father, still being actively involved in their lives up until recently, was another sickening blow Mark delivered to me during one of our late-night calls. "She told me Daniel was just an old friend, Jess." Mark's voice was raw, like he'd swallowed broken glass. He'd had feelings for her since college, apparently, but she chose me because Daniel wasn't financially stable enough for her taste back then. Can you believe the audacity? She painted it like she did me a favor. He let out a harsh, humorless laugh. They were still in touch. He'd come over for dinner, Jess. Dinner. He and his wife, because yes, Daniel was married now, for all of 4 months, the poor bastard. They'd all sit there, Sarah, me, Daniel, and his oblivious new wife, chatting like old friends, while I was unknowingly raising Daniel's son. It's beyond disgusting. Listening to him, I felt a fresh wave of nausea. The sheer, calculated deception was almost incomprehensible. This wasn't just a one-time mistake fueled by alcohol and emotion, as Sarah had initially claimed. This was a sustained, elaborate charade. The gaslighting hadn't just been directed at Mark about the paternity. It had been woven into the very fabric of their social lives, with Daniel playing a willing, or perhaps equally manipulated, part. She claimed it only happened once after we were married, Mark continued, his voice thick with bitterness. Drunk and emotional, she said. But now? I don't know what to believe. Was she seeing him the whole time? Was our entire marriage, our son, just collateral damage in her twisted games? He confessed his regret. The years he'd spent defending Sarah against anyone who dared breathe a word against her, including me. I was an idiot, Jess. A blind, trusting idiot. She was after whatever little money I had, and I was the only fool desperate enough to overlook her reputation. I felt a pang of guilt, sharp and insistent. Mark, I should have pushed harder. I should have forced you to see. No, Jess, he interrupted, his voice surprisingly firm. This isn't on you. I wouldn't have listened. I was too far gone, too caught up in the illusion she spun. The trauma bond was still evident in the way he spoke of her, a painful mix of past love and present betrayal. Sarah, meanwhile, was not going down without a fight, despite her rapidly worsening health. Her cancer, according to Mark, who was still privy to her medical updates through her parents, had progressed. She was weaker, frailer, yet her determination to see Leo, to somehow salvage something from the wreckage, was ferocious. She started visiting Mark's house. He was still living there with Leo, unable to bring himself to uproot the baby yet, pleading for forgiveness, trying to convince him not to leave her. "It's crazy difficult, Jess," Mark admitted, his voice strained, "to say no to a literal cancer patient, someone you shared a life with, someone you still have feelings for despite everything. She cries, she begs, she talks about the good times. And for a split second I almost forget the lies, the cheating." He was caught in an agonizing emotional vice. My role in all of this shifted. The most I could do was offer practical support. I babysat Leo whenever Mark needed a break, whenever he had to meet with his lawyer, a bulldog of a woman named Ms. Henderson, who was building a formidable case for his custody. Leo was a ray of sunshine in this gathering darkness, his innocent gurgles and bright smiles a stark contrast to the adult misery surrounding him. About a week and a half after Mark's last visit, he dropped by my house unexpectedly, Leo in his arms. He looked exhausted, but there was a new, harder set to his jaw. "Sarah's up the ante," he said grimly, handing Leo to me. "She told Daniel, Leo's biological father, that I'm trying to cut her out completely, and that Daniel needs to fight for custody too, or he'll never see his son. She's trying to use him as leverage against me." "What?" I was aghast. "But Daniel's wife? What does she think of all this?" Apparently, Daniel confessed everything to his new wife. From what Sarah let slip, she's not pleased, to put it mildly. Their 4-month marriage is already on the rocks. But Sarah, in her infinite wisdom, tried to play the cancer card with me again. Said she wouldn't be around much longer, so I should just let her spend her last few months peacefully with her baby, instead of being selfish and dragging this through the courts. Mark's laugh was devoid of humor. "She doesn't get it, Jess. The custody battle isn't about getting back at her, it's about protecting Leo. It's about ensuring that if she passes, Daniel can't just swoop in and take my son away from me just because of a biological tie. He's my son, Jess." I raised him. "I love him." His voice broke, and he quickly looked away, composing himself. "Only a truly selfish person," I murmured, "would make her illness the centerpiece of a custody battle for a child she deceived everyone about." "Exactly," Mark agreed. "She's even trying to spin the divorce as me getting back at her. She can't comprehend that I respect myself too much to stay married to someone who used me, lied to me, and cheated on me for years." The situation was spiraling. The thought of little Leo, already facing so much upheaval, being torn between 3 warring adults was sickening. I was grateful, in that moment, that he was too young to understand any of it, his world still a blissful landscape of naps, feedings, and cuddles. I prayed he could stay that way, shielded from the fallout for as long as possible. A few days later, the unexpected happened. Sarah showed up at my house. Mark often dropped Leo off with me when he had errands or just needed a break, and she knew his patterns. He'd been avoiding her calls, her texts, her desperate pleas to see Leo at his house. So she came to mine. She looked terrible. Not just sick, but defeated. The fight seemed to have gone out of her, replaced by a fragile, almost translucent weariness. Her designer clothes hung loosely on her frail frame, and her usually immaculate hair was dull. I found myself, despite everything, struggling to turn away this ghost of the woman she once was. Before I could say much, Mark's car pulled up. He'd come to pick up Leo. He saw Sarah on my porch, and his face hardened. But there was also a flicker of something else. Resignation? Pity. He took a deep breath. Then, instead of turning her away, he did something I didn't expect. He invited her in. "Make it quick, Sarah," he said, his voice devoid of warmth but not entirely unkind. "I have to get Leo home for his nap, and I have a call with Henderson soon." I felt like an intruder, a reluctant audience to a deeply personal, painful drama. Sarah, her voice barely above a whisper, pleaded with Mark. Not for reconciliation, not anymore. She said she'd made her peace with the divorce, that she wouldn't contest it. But she begged him for joint custody of Leo. She said Daniel was no longer in the picture, that she'd handled it, realizing her mistake in trying to involve him further. Her emotions had gotten the better of her, she claimed, leading her to tell Daniel in a fit of anger and desperation. Now, all she wanted, she insisted, was to spend as much time as possible with Leo. Her cancer, her doctors had told her that week, had progressed to stage 3. Her time, she said, was running out. I watched Mark's face. He looked distraught, torn. The man who had loved this woman, who had built a life with her, was still there beneath the layers of anger and betrayal. But then he straightened, his expression firming. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm, measured, "the most I can offer you is supervised visits. Once a week." Sarah's eyes, already dull with illness, welled with fresh tears. "Supervised? Mark, he's my son." "He's the son you lied to me about for months, Sarah," Mark stated, his voice unwavering. "The son whose paternity you actively concealed, just like you did with your friend's child. You can't just expect me to forget that, to move on, simply because you're sick. I'm suffering too, Sarah. My pain, my scars, they may not be visible like yours, but they are just as real. I defended you against everyone who called you a gold digger, a scammer. And in the end, they were right. You cheated on me, you lied to me, despite how hard I fought for you, for us." His voice, though quiet, resonated with the profound weight of his shattered trust. "For my own sake, for Leo's sake, I need to let you go, to start fresh." He told her she could either agree to supervised visits, once a week, at a neutral location, or she could take him to court. After a long, tense silence, during which Sarah seemed to shrink even further into herself, she whispered, "Supervised visits." It was what the court would likely have ordered anyway, given the circumstances. The divorce proceeded. The custody arrangement for supervised visits was legally formalized. Sarah's health continued to decline. Mark, with a heavy heart, allowed her the visits, always with a court-appointed supervisor present. He did it for Leo, he told me, so that one day, if Leo asked, he could say he'd allowed his mother to see him, despite everything. He also did it, I suspected, because a small part of him still mourned the woman he thought he'd married, the life he thought they'd had. It's been over a year now since that awful day the paternity test results came back. Sarah passed away 6 months ago. Her parents, devastated by the loss of their daughter and the preceding scandal, moved to Florida to be closer to their other child. Daniel, after a messy and very public divorce from his own wife, the details of which became fodder for Marietta gossip for months, eventually moved out of state as well. He made no further attempts to gain custody of Leo, perhaps realizing the uphill legal battle he faced, or perhaps, as Mark hoped, out of a shred of decency. Mark is slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding his life. He didn't take the job in Charlotte. He found a new position locally, one that allows him to be there for Leo every single day. He's an incredible father, patient, loving, and fiercely protective. Leo is a happy, thriving toddler, blissfully unaware of the storm that raged around his infancy. He knows his mother was sick, that she loved him very much, and that she's an angel in heaven now. Mark will tell him the whole truth one day, when he's old enough to understand, but for now, he's shielding him with every fiber of his being. My relationship with Mark is stronger than ever. We weathered this storm together, our shared grief, and his eventual hard-won understanding of my initial concerns, forging a new, deeper bond. I am still Leo's emergency guardian, a role I now embrace with a full heart, free of the shadows of doubt that once clouded it. Sometimes I think about Sarah. Not with anger anymore, but with a profound sadness. Sadness for the choices she made, for the lives she damaged, including her own. Her story is a cautionary tale of how narcissism, left unchecked, can lead to a devastating cascade of lies and betrayals, consuming everything in its path. It's a story about the insidious power of gaslighting to distort reality, and the agonizing struggle to break free from a trauma bond built on deceit. It's also, I hope, a story about the resilience of the human spirit, about the power of truth, however painful, to ultimately set you free. Mark is healing, and I am here, their constant, their anchor, just as they are mine. We are a family, forged in fire, and we will be okay. The path to forming new, healthy boundaries was excruciating but necessary for all of us to move forward. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch!